More on this right now. Let's bring in Mark Thiessen. He's former White House speechwriter, Washington Post columnist, Fox News contributor, the co-host of the podcast, What the Hell is Going On? And he's on your TV set right now. You wrote an op-ed about this in which you said, quote, "You've heard the expression that the cover-up is worse than the crime. Well, in the case of New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, the opposite might be true." You've been listening to this along with us. Mark, your thoughts.
Yeah. Well, first, I wish I could give Janestine a hug right now because I can't imagine how she's feeling watching Andrew Cuomo say the things that he said. There are so many lies to unpack in what he just said, but let's start just with what you were talking about. The fact is that it's not Republicans who are accusing him of undercounting the deaths. It's the New York's Democratic Attorney General of the state of New York who said that he did not report as the data on people who were nursing home residents who later were taken to hospitals and died there, counting them as nursing home deaths. And that undercounted the number of nursing home deaths by a significant margin. He said that they cooperated with the Justice Department immediately. That's not true. There were two requests from the Justice Department. The first one came from the Civil Rights Division. I interviewed people from the Justice Department who explained this to me. The first one came from the Civil Rights Division, which has jurisdiction over just government nursing homes, which is only a couple dozen in the state of New York. And they requested the data on whether or not they were the reporting on nursing home deaths. They responded to that, the Cuomo administration, and the data was so skewed that the Civil Rights Division folks went to the Civil Division, which is the one that has jurisdiction over private nursing homes in New York, which is the vast majority of nursing homes, and asked them to make the same request. They did. Cuomo stonewalled that request. They didn't provide the data until the last days of the Trump administration because they were trying to wait out the Trump administration, thinking they'd get better treatment from the Biden administration.
Yeah.
And
so
then
let's
just one more point, John.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish your point.
No, and then the real tragedy of what he did is that in addition to the causing additional nursing home deaths by putting sick people in the nursing homes, is not that he lied to the Justice Department. He lied starting in May to public health officials who were desperately trying to understand how this new virus had reached us, who was vulnerable, who was dying, where they were dying, because they were trying to combat this. That's like providing false intelligence to battlefield commanders in the middle of a battle in a time of war. They were trying to, and what's important is the New York variant of the virus is the one that spread across the United States. It wasn't the West Coast variant that came straight from China. It was the East Coast variant that arrived in New York, and New York seeded the pandemic across the entire country. So if you provide false data about who's dying in New York, you're undermining the national effort to fight this virus, and that's what Andrew Cuomo did.
You know, that was a point that I was just about to bring up with you. I wanted to put a little bit more of your op-ed up there, but we don't need to now since you have articulated it. But compare and contrast what you just said with what Cuomo said, where he said his big mistake was that we didn't fight back aggressively enough in this void. I was not aggressive enough in knocking down the falsities. I mean, there's a lot of daylight between what you say he did and what he says his mistake was.
Yeah, well, again, he's not fighting with me. He's not fighting with Republicans. He's not fighting with the Trump administration. The people who are calling him out is the Democratic Attorney General of the state of New York, Democratic state legislatures, including some who lost loved ones in these nursing homes and want to know the truth. He's in a fight with his own side. So, to try and make this out like some conservatives are trying to call him out, and this false, crocodile tears about the poor people who lost people in nursing homes, when we now know that more people died in nursing homes because of his policies, and then he lied to cover it up, undermined the public health response across the United States. Just some data. 70% of the COVID cases in Texas came from New York, 78% from Wisconsin, 80% from Alaska, 80% in Arizona, 100% Louisiana came from the New York variant. So it was vital in our public health response to understand who was dying, where they were dying, who was vulnerable, how people were dying, because that was feeding our response across the country. And Cuomo provided our public health experts in Washington at the CDC, at the Department of Health, with false data, false intelligence that impeded their ability to understand how this pandemic was spreading. So he didn't just hurt New Yorkers. He hurt COVID victims across the United States. That is an impeachable offense.
I think it's a safe assumption to say that his news conference this afternoon does not put this to rest by any stretch of the imagination. Mark Thiessen, good to talk to you. Thanks so much. And Sandra, again, we have a case here of the governor of New York not saying, okay, we made a mistake by putting these folks back in nursing homes. where it spread like wildfire. We accept responsibility for that. He is again saying, not my fault. Check with your Republican friends. They're the ones who are at the root of this. But again, as Mark Thiessen points out, he's getting it as much from Democrats as he is from Republicans on this issue.
Absolutely. And he continues to point to what he calls a void in information that led to rumors and misinformation about this story. He also talked about the 24-hour news stations. There's information that does not get corrected. It gets repeated, and then people think it's true. So he is still playing the blame game. And again, we'll have those two brothers coming up who were directly affected by this.
Looking forward to that. And again, one of the critical points of what he just said right now is he insisted that the numbers were fully reported, that all of the deaths were counted, but they weren't counted, according to the Attorney General of New York, the way that they should have.
Right.
That the deaths in nursing homes were underreported. So maybe they had an aggregate figure, but they didn't break it down in such a way that epidemiologists and medical experts could say, we got a serious problem here.
So he has not started taking questions at that news conference yet, but John, we're going to be monitoring that for when he does and talks about this. We will get back to it.